Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Homox. My name is Sally Cantwell. I'm one of the co-presidents of Homox PTA, and to my right is Stephanie Chase, who's my co-president, and to my left is Amy Knoffel, who is our treasurer. Before we start this fantastic presentation, we have a couple of PTA things that we need to do. For those of you that are PTA members, we handed you a card. It wasn't a quiz, but we have 2 votes that we need to get done this evening with a quorum, and if you could write yes or no and then hand them to us, then we can either approve or not approve the motions that we would like to present to you. The first one that I wanted to present to you was that per our bylaws, we have to put together and we have to propose a motion to create a PTA nominating committee for 2019-20, which is a bit scary, school year, and we would like to put forward the following 5 candidates. The first one is Jennifer Keefe, Lisa Collins, Linnea Holmes, Jonah Dugan, and Jessica Lasman. What we've done within the PTA, we've made sure that we have all of the 4 elementary schools are covered, so that we have representation from all the schools, so that everybody can feel part of the Homox PTA. So with that in mind, I would, may I have a motion to approve the names for the nominating committee? Thank you. Can I have a second? All those in favour? Thank you. And anybody against? Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to Amy, who's going to run through the budget, and then we have one other vote that we need to make.
If anyone needs a card,
and I have pencils, if anybody needs a pencil.
So I apologize, I'm not as eloquent as Sally is. So quickly, very interesting stuff, the budget. We've been sailing well through this budget here, as you can, I don't know, see or not, the numbers. We have some copies if you would like to have a look closely at the numbers. The main thing that we'd like to propose tonight is to dedicate some of our reserve funds for a beautification project for the Homox school. We have almost at the beginning of the school year $30,000 in extra reserves, and we would like to propose a budget of $15,000 for that project. So more to follow in the Homox Press, but
yeah, no, what we're effectively trying to do is we would like to beautify the outside of Homox. As many of you can see when you come in, it's a little bit sad. In my early days, as Rena would agree to, there was a tree outside. Well, actually there were many, and in 2008, and sadly there are now no trees. So we wanted to do a little bit of beautification to make Homox feel a little bit more welcome and at home, and the idea is to go out to local artists and see how they can help us make Homox exterior feel more welcoming to our students that are coming in. So with that again, I would like to, so you know we have passed the current Homox PTA Executive Board. They have agreed that they would be willing to spend the reserves, but some of the reserves, but we would like approval from our main PTA constituency that you are comfortable with us going forward with this. So we would like to make a motion to put aside $15,000 towards the beautification project of the external and internal pieces of the Homox. If I could ask for a motion, please. Thank you. May I have a second? All those in favour? Anybody against? Oh, I did really well. And if you could possibly, as you leave, hand us the cards, that we just need to keep a record of this for purposes of transparency for people that want to see what we've been spending our money on. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming tonight. It's going to be an incredibly enlightening presentation, and I'd like to hand over to
Hi everybody, everybody hear me in the back? So welcome, and as Amy said, this is going to be a very interesting program. I want to do some thank yous. But did everybody get a folder? If you did not, just raise your hand. There's some really interesting information. If you did not get a folder, we'll bring them to you. So first, I want to thank, are there any elected officials here? I've been looking around the crowd. Good. Okay, I want to thank first Homix for hosting this wonderful program. I want to thank LMC-TV for the taping. There is a wonderful translator. If anybody needs translation, please come down to the front over here. I also want to thank the Homix PTA, the Mamaroneck High School PTSA, Assemblyman Stephen Otis. I want to acknowledge Janet Buckbinder. Janet, where are you? Stepped outside. Janet is heading up Radar and has been doing a really terrific job for many, many years. And I also want to thank the villages of Mamaroneck and Larchmont and the town of Mamaroneck for their generous support of Radar and all the programs that we do. And I now want to just welcome, and before I welcome Janie, I want to tell you, here's how the program's going to go tonight. Yes?
No, I'm handing out folders.
We're going to have a data presentation of our survey results, which are very interesting. We're then going to have a presentation from Dr. Shatkin, and then we're going to have time for Q&A at the end. This, to my left, is our wonderful evaluator of our survey results, Dr. Jean Matisse-Maroney, who is also the director of the Iona College Center for Social Research, an associate professor of social work. And Jeannie, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm glad to join you all in talking a little bit about some of the data findings from the survey that was conducted in the fall. You will see from the title here, though, that I will not just be talking about data from the fall, but we're really looking at sort of the breadth of data that exists in the Larchmont Mamaroneck community, dating back to 2006, because part of what we're interested in understanding about what's happening in the community is what's happening over time. Because we believe that that is associated with the efforts of the coalition. Okay, so let me just begin, because I don't know how many folks may be familiar with CTC surveys, which is the survey that was utilized back in the fall. And I'm just going to quickly run through a little bit of information about what a CTC survey is. CTC stands for Communities That Care Survey. They are widely used surveys that measure youth problem behaviors as well as risk and protective factors, and we'll talk a little bit about risk and protective factors, which is really the theoretical model under which the coalition operates, the framework within which it is working. The CTC surveys are administered to students in grades 6 through 12 every 2 years. They've been extensively tested for validity, meaning how well, and reliability, meaning how consistently it measures youth problem behaviors and the risk and protective factors. These are nationally normed surveys, and they are approved by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, which is SAMHSA, for use for these purposes. So we're using a very valid and reliable measure that is used by many, many communities nationwide. So, a lot of the times there's a question, particularly in the minds of parents, about whether we can actually trust the findings of the CTC Teen Survey, mostly because we wonder sometimes about whether the kids have actually been honest in their reporting. Well, what we know is that the survey itself has undergone this extensive testing for validity and reliability, so we think we've got a good measure. Secondly, one of the things that happens with the data is that if we've had exaggerated responses, so if somebody has responded that they have used every single substance 50 times in the last 30 days, that stuff gets stripped out of the data set, okay? So there's a control there for that. We also examine the data over time and in relation to risk and protective factors, and have seen some true consistency between what's happening on the risk and protective factor side and what we're seeing on the use side. So it is suggesting to us that the data that we're getting is actual and real. And then finally, what we know from the field of social science is that self-report data, meaning information that people report about their own behaviors and actions, if it's collected anonymously, with little fear of reprisal, is in fact valid. We do these surveys anonymously. There is no identifying data on here. The kids all respond anonymously. The only thing that we do know is which grade they're associated with. So let's take a look at a little bit of what the history of surveying. See here, right, the sample sizes 2006 to 2012. We're hovering somewhere around the 1,000 mark, with the exception of 2010 when we had far fewer surveys. 2014, we had 2,063, 2016, 2,031, but we had a smaller sample in 2018. So we went back to, you know, a little closer to the 1,000 mark. Actually, we're at 1,328. So 1,328 kids, 626 of them from the middle school and 702 of them from the high school responded to the survey, which was administered in the fall. Which brings me to a bit of a caveat about the data that I'm about to present. All of the other survey administrations that were conducted from 2006 through 2016 were administered, the surveys were administered in the spring. So we were measuring, or what we were actually yielding was data about youth behavior in the spring, which may not sound like such a big deal, but I think that there are actually some considerations that we need to be mindful of as we look at this data. The other thing we need to consider is that whereas the prior two survey administrations, 14 and 16, included all students in attendance at school on the day of the survey, 2018 survey, the survey was not administered to the full student population, rather it was administered to all students in class X at Y time. So that actually limits some of our sample. In 2014 and 2016, we were actually looking at like the full student population. We were pretty confident that the findings that we had there were representative of the entire student population. This is a sample. So these need to be considered in thinking about the data that I'm about to present, but we still think that we've got a pretty good measure. It just may actually present itself now as sort of our new baseline for fall administration of survey data. All right, so we move now to sort of the theoretical model that guides the work of the coalition and the way that we think about how to address prevention of substance use amongst adolescents. And this is called the risk and protective factor model. Basically, what we're talking about here is examining risk factors, which are conditions that create, conditions that increase the likelihood of a young person becoming involved in substance use. And research shows that the greater number of factors to which adolescents are exposed, the greater the risk they face of using substances. So we're looking at what are the things that make kids vulnerable to substance use. And we're also looking at the conditions that buffer youth from exposure to risk, either by reducing the impact of risks or changing the way that young people respond to those risks. Protective factors help to counter the risks. Okay, so we're looking at sort of both sides of this equation. So, we have some pretty good news in our data over time that basically is telling us that in the Mamaroneck community, risk factors have been diminishing. And in 2018, we're at their lowest levels yet, which is really good news. So this is just sort of a highlight of some of the risk factors that we've been following pretty closely since 2006. These are actually all measured on a 100-point scale, with 50 being the average, the normative average. So for risk factors, we're actually looking for scores below 50, and for protective factors, we're looking for them to be beyond 50. So with poor family supervision, back in 2006, we were over that 50th percentile mark, and in 2018, we're at 35. So that indicates a change of almost 21 points, which is pretty significant. Parental attitudes favorable toward alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use, which is what ATOD stands for. Back in 2006, we were at 51, so we were over the 50th percentile. And the past 2 administrations have seen the number at 40. Our friends' use of drugs was pretty close in 2006 to that 50th percentile, down in 2016 to 37, and in 2018, 35. Community transitions and mobility, this one has pretty much stayed fairly steady. This has to do with people moving in and out of the community, or even within the community, just sort of this, the nature of changes. And that one has stayed pretty steady, hovering right around the 50th percentile. On the on the protective factor side, we have seen them increasing over time, and with very few exceptions, are now at their highest levels. Both of these things are very good news. To have your risk factors be at their lowest levels and the protective factors at their highest levels is the kind of equation that very much supports prevention and decreased substance use amongst kids. So we've looked at things like family attachment in 2006 at 55, still over the 50th percentile mark, but in 2018 all the way up to 66. Kids feel connected to their families, and they tell us this in the survey data. Family opportunities for pro-social involvement at 55 and 06, 63 and 18. Family rewards for that pro-social involvement, 57 in 06, in 18, 67. So we've been growing really kind of in leaps and bounds here. School opportunities for pro-social involvement was high back in 2006, but has continued to even tick a little bit higher. Social skills, which essentially focuses mostly on the items in the survey focus mostly on kids' refusal skills, peer refusal skills. Back in 2006 at 53, now at 62. Belief in the moral order, back in 2006, 56, now at 68. Kids have a very strong sense of what's right and what's wrong. And religiosity has actually been one of those protective factors that has been on the decline. And this really kind of speaks to sort of kids being involved in regular religious practices. Seems to be on the decline. 53 back in 06, and 2018 is at 46. So that may be an area that there may be some consideration around targeting. All right, so as we talk about some of the use numbers, I'm going to start with sort of the good news, because I think that it's always important to take a look at the strides that we have made. In terms of alcohol use, we have seen both perception of risk, which is asking kids about how much harm do you think you face or anybody faces in using alcohol. That has actually continued to increase both at the middle school level and at the high school level. And in 2018, kids were reporting, in the middle school, 85.4% of the kids were saying a lot of harm, moderate or great harm, and the high school students were saying 85.2% of them were saying that there was moderate to great risk associated with alcohol use. In terms of what kids perceive that you think about their using alcohol, we have seen this holding very steady. The middle school has always had very, very high rates, high 90s, right? So, and this year, no different. In 2018, we see 98% of the middle school kids saying, yeah, no, my parents would not approve of me drinking. In the high school, those numbers started out much lower. Back in 2006, only 73.8% of the high school students were saying, yeah, my parents would not be okay with me drinking alcohol. And in 2018, 96.7% of the high school students who responded to the survey said, my parents would not approve. And this is important information for us to work within, and significant strides.
Do you think that's because of the larger sample size,
It may have been affected, all of the data may have been affected by sampling error for sure, which is why I started with the caveat. And I also don't know if some of the data may have been affected by the move to the fall administration. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but there are very distinct differences, particularly for 12th graders, between being a fall semester 12th grader and a spring semester 12th grader that correlate often with their behaviors and their choices. So yes, that may have had an impact, but that one was really about their perceptions of disapproval. So yes, there may have been an influence there. We see similar good news about marijuana use, and actually all very high levels that, you know, parents would not approve of kids using marijuana, both at the middle school and high school levels. We have some more good news on both alcohol and marijuana use in terms of what the kids who took this survey think about, or how they perceive their friends' disapproval. And we see that is on the rise. Particularly in the high school, we begin to see some significant movement. So for alcohol, you know, pretty much the middle school students are saying at very high levels, and have for many years, yeah, my friends would not think it was okay if I was drinking. 92.9% back in 2014, 94.7 in 16, and 95.5 in 18. By the way, this particular question only entered the survey in 2014. It became one of the new core measures, so the data is only going back to 2014. In terms of alcohol in the high school, back in 2014, actually 2014 to 2016, we were hovering somewhere in the low 70s, 72.4 and 72.1% respectively. In 2018, we have 80.7% of the high school students saying, yeah, I don't think my friends would be so cool with me drinking. In terms of marijuana, we see consistently high levels across the middle school ratings, lower levels in the high school, considerably lower levels in the high school, and interestingly, less perceived disapproval of their use of marijuana than alcohol. So that's just something to consider. Nonetheless, what we are seeing are the numbers ticking up. So back in 2014, 46% of the kids said that they thought that their friends would disapprove of them using marijuana, but in 2018, 59.2% of them said the same. Yet more good news, decline in alcohol use rates, and this one I definitely think has been influenced by the move to the fall administration. So we need to take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, but also perhaps some optimism. If we look at the rates of alcohol use, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade, and again, I'll go back to the reason why we do that is so that we can actually make comparisons to the national survey data set. 8th graders' use has declined from 27.1% back in 2006, and in 2018, 7% of the 8th graders reported alcohol use in the past 30 days. In 10th grade, we went from a high of 59.8% of 10th graders reporting that they had utilized alcohol in the last 30 days, down to 27.4% in the 2018. Again, potentially influenced by the move to the fall administration. And then In 12th grade, which actually hit its peak in 2008, when 80.7% of 12th graders reported having drunk alcohol in the past 30 days, we are down to a low of 55.4% reporting in fall of 2018. This one in particular, we believe was influenced by the move to full administration, and will require us to sort of do the long look and perhaps consider this round of data as sort of our new baseline, and going forward with future fall administrations, be looking at what those comparisons are. Some more good news. There's a decline in marijuana use across all grades. And in 2018, these rates are the lowest since we began surveying back in 2006. Since hitting its peak in 2010, the 8th grade use is down 80%, 10th grade use is down 64%, and 12th grade use is down 26%. Again, potentially impacted by this move to full administration, but numbers trending down nonetheless. However,
maybe it's not the right time to ask it, but if there's such an anomaly in the numbers, and anyone who has a 12th grader knows what they're doing in the fall of their 12th grade year, trying to get into college.
correct.
So it's no surprise that those numbers would precipitously fall.
Absolutely.
Why would you not just continue with spring, which seems like a much more accurate reflection of what their year habits are, rather than moving to a fall as a baseline?
One of the issues that we have been grappling with over the years is all of those normative comparisons that we make to nationally collected data, New York State data, Westchester County, is looking or has been doing full administrations. So in some ways we've been comparing our spring data to fall data. So it will bring us in step with what's happening around us. And we need to be thinking about what may need to happen in terms of spring, in terms of interventions and preventions and things along those lines.
Jeannie, one second. You're making very good points. But even if you take out the change from the spring to the fall, and you look at the trend over 10
Yes.
years, you still see a steady decline. And so that's something important to note. I do agree with Jeannie that I think that these numbers will look very different if it was in the spring. But look at the trend over 10
Yes.
years, which is still very positive. And I think it kind of corresponds. I think we all know, if you have 12th graders, we know what happens in the springtime. I think I forgot to mention, Dr. Mark Levy, I'm director of the Community Counseling Center. We also have an eye on a lot of kids in this community. What's consistent in terms of what we're seeing is definitely declines in middle school and declines in the early years of high school. We know that seniors are partying a lot.
Yes.
And then we'll talk about what to do in terms of dealing with that. So just keep this in mind when we're looking at, look at the 10-year trend, and then we'll adjust from there.
Okay, so we've got some good news on marijuana, but nearly a third, 32.4% of 12th graders are reporting marijuana use in the previous 30 days. So, we've got good news, check. Progress, check. But there are quite a few buts, because we've got some hot spots, right, when we look at this year's data. Alcohol remains the primary substance being used by Mamaroneck youth. But when we look at the rates in the middle school, they're very low. 0.9 in 6th grade, 1.4 in 7% in 8th grade. This is really important that those numbers have declined so considerably and where this is weighing in, because what we know is the earlier kids experiment and use any substance, the greater their risk for developing a substance use disorder and all the other things that use puts them at risk for or makes them vulnerable to. So the fact that we are looking at sort of more kids at least with delayed onset, later onset of any of experimentation and use is a good thing. However, in the high school, we are seeing 20.8% of the kids are reporting alcohol use in 9th grade, 27.4% in 10th, and then we have this big jump to 11th grade, where 50% of the kids who took the survey responded that they had used alcohol in the past 30 days, 55.4% in the 12th grade. Marijuana looks like we've got some hot spots in 11th and 12th grade. Not that these other numbers are not important for us to note, that 11.2% of 10th graders or 5.6% of 9th graders are using, but the real hot spots are in the 11th and 12th grade. One of the other things that we took a close look at was e-cigs and vaping, which actually was accomplished by adding our own item to the survey. Because e-cigs and vaping are relatively new in the field, they are not embedded in the questions of the CTC survey. So we added an item, and this is what the kids told us. 0.9% of 6th graders had used, 0% in 7th grade, 1.6% in 8th grade, 3.7% in 9th, 2% in 10th, and then again, we have this jump, 15.2% of the 11th graders and 14.6% of the 12th graders. But quite honestly, those numbers are not as high, I think, as folks were anticipating. E-cig and vaping use is the particular substance that has jumped exponentially nationwide. So these numbers are not so very high. We also took a look at, questions about prescription drugs and prescription drug use, particularly as we all, hear all the time on the news about the opioid crisis. So we really wanted to take a closer look and examine that. And what we found is that really the kids are still reporting very, very low levels of prescription drug use, which again, another really good thing. And so you'll see these numbers are actually quite low. You can see for yourselves. We also are tracking heroin, which might be a bit of a shocker to lots of folks, but one of the things we discovered was that in 2014, heroin showed up in our data, and it had never appeared before. So we're tracking it, but this is actually, it's at such a low level that really what we need to do is just continue to monitor it. But it has become part of the landscape here. All right, so we also know that e-cigarettes or vaping, marijuana and alcohol use rates increase by grade. And you can see from the graph here, it just sort of exponentially grows. So the middle school students' use is very low, with gradual increases noted from 6th to 8th grade. 8th to 9th grade rates, though, now nearly triple for alcohol, double for e-cigs and vaping, and marijuana. Marijuana use rates double again from 9th to 10th grade, while alcohol use rates increase by 31% from 9th to 10th. And from 10th to 11th grade, e-cig vaping use is more than 7 times greater. Alcohol use increases by 82%, and marijuana use is 2.5 times greater from 10th to 11th. The highest use levels for both alcohol and marijuana use are found in the 12th grade. And the highest e-cig and vaping levels are actually in the 11th grade, followed by the 12th grade. So, another ongoing area of concern, when we look at Mamaroneck youth substance use for alcohol, and we look at this in comparison to 3 different data sets. One is the national data set, which is put out by Monitoring the Future out of the University of Michigan. The last published data set available for comparison was 2017 on that. We also look at New York State data and Westchester County data, which actually is actually collected within the same survey and then broken out by county throughout the state. And the last data set that was available for that was 2015. So this is an ongoing area of concern, particularly for our 12th graders, whose use is above national, state, and county. So we can see that at 55.4%, it's considerably above. And 10th grade use is above national levels. The good news is our 8th grade use is below all 3. And 10th grade use is actually below the state levels and pretty much on par with what we're seeing across the county. Similarly, we look at another ongoing area of concern relative to marijuana rates, use rates. So 32.4% of the 12th graders reported having used marijuana in the 30 days prior to the survey. And our 12th grade use rate is above county, state, national. The good news is 8th and 10th grade use rates are below all 3. So that is a good thing. We've had some considerable progress, yet continued concern from over the last 12 years in terms of binge drinking trends. If folks are not familiar with what constitutes binge drinking, it means the consumption of 5 or more alcoholic drinks in a row, on at least one occasion. And back in 2006, 44.9% of our high school students told us that they had engaged in binge drinking. We are now down to 17.7%. This one, I believe, is one of those data points that was very significantly impacted by the fall administration. But even 17.7% of the high school students, that's just out of the 691 respondents, the 691 kids responded to this particular item. It means that 122 of them had engaged in binge drinking. So this is an area of concern that is something we want to keep our eyes on, particularly because engaging in binge drinking really increases the risk for things like alcohol poisoning, injury or death due to things like falls, fires, drowning, car accidents, DUIs, pregnancy or STDs due to unintended sexual activity, becoming the victim of sexual assault. These are all risks that kids place themselves at when they're engaged in binge drinking. So this is one of the reasons why we want to keep a close eye on this. So, and this actually goes to Mark's point earlier, okay? If we look at substance use from 2006 through 2018, even with whatever the impact may be in terms of the data findings with the move from spring to fall in 2018, we are looking at declining use rates, right? For alcohol, for marijuana, and prescription drugs. Some more than others, but clearly there has been a move in that direction community-wide over this period of time. So that is really...
If you were to adjust percentages to also include the vaping, would that bump those numbers up?
The vaping is, no, because each line represents a different substance. The vaping, we only have the single data point right now because that was not something that was collected in prior surveys because it's just shown up on the scene. So we don't.
Let's suppose you put the vaping number into any prescription in 2018. Like how much would that
But it's not considered a prescription drug, so we wouldn't mix the two together.
I know, this will count for some type of substance abuse. You know what I mean? Like this is a nice trend in going down, but you're also going to capture.
We have a starting point. We have our first data point on e-cigs and vaping from the 2018 data. We will now track that going forward. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm explicitly talking here about alcohol, marijuana, and prescription drug use, which is what we have been following most closely since 2006. So this is really just looking at what does this look like over time. And part of what it's saying to us is this is probably the best we have seen it in these dozen years.
Can I ask that e-cigarettes and vaping does not distinguish between whether I'm vaping nicotine or marijuana?
Yes, that is a problem, and that is a problem with the survey items that have not yet been added to the CTC survey, and that will need to get worked in there because there is no reference in there that has, there is no item in there that would even capture the distinction between them.
Because if what we're seeing is we're not listing it as marijuana because I'm vaping it, then our data is starting to be
Correct. Correct. We are not the only community that's affected by that because lots of communities are using the CTC surveys, but to get them updated is something that has to come out of the federal government. So yeah, that is something that I'm hoping will happen. We did see you know, this addition of Friends' disapproval of use move into what are called the core measures, and that happened back in 2014. It showed up in the surveys at that point, so I'm hoping that they will catch up with themselves. It's become enough of a serious problem, and it is certainly in the media enough that I think we probably are looking at some changes coming, but it was not, they were not made in time for this last survey.
How do you account for the difference that doesn't correlate between the perceived disapproval of the use versus the actual, which seems to be really high, and the use, I mean, it doesn't correlate at all. Like, how do you account for that?
I don't know. We don't know what that means. I mean, part of why we collect the data is to say, okay, where are these questions that we need to ask? Why are there such disparities here? And then what sort of efforts, what sort of initiatives and strategies do we need to implement to try to address that?
It's the perceived disapproval of both the parents and the peers.
Yep.
It doesn't.
And
Okay.
yeah.
If the question is asked in September, it would be different than October because the last 30 days are on holiday. Could you tell us when you administer the test?
Yes, the surveys were administered in November.
In previous surveys, did you ever capture data on cigarette use to compare to the
Yes, we actually, you know what, we had always, we had historically reported on tobacco use, but then the rates had dropped so low that we stopped keeping a close eye on tobacco use and really concentrated on alcohol and marijuana, which were sort of the high use ones, and then wanted to make sure that we were keeping our eye on prescription drug use, particularly with regard to the opioids, sort of added that back in, and now have added e-cigs and vaping to the monitoring picture, but the rates are quite low.
Did you capture nicotine use or cigarette use in 2006 or 2008?
Yes, yes. I mean, we routinely did. You're right. I did not include it in here because we have not seen it. But we have it. We certainly can get that to you.
Jeannie, just repeat the questions if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This question was about whether we had captured data on tobacco cigarette use.
How do you define use? What's the definition of use?
Yeah, this is one of the things that we need to kind of talk through. The question basically asks, have you used X, Y, or Z in the past 30 days. Regular use is defined, and this is not defined by me, and this is not defined by Radar. This is defined by SAMHSA. So the regular use is past 30-day use. It is not specific to frequency. And captured in there, I think, also is, somebody who just experimented with something for the first time. It's captured if it's in the last 30 days of the survey, prior 30 days to the survey, it might get captured there.
So it doesn't cover quantity?
There's a separate item about frequency of use. We have not routinely been examining and reporting that out because this past 30-day use is what CACA uses as their core measure for use. So everybody who's reporting in is reporting in on that data point. But there are some items on the survey that ask about frequency of use, on how many occasions have you. But even those questions don't specify a time frame. So how somebody interprets that could be, in your lifetime, in past 30 days.
Why were so many less students surveyed? I feel like we're missing a lot.
I actually have to sort of ask for some help on that.
We did not have the funding to be able to reach all of the students as we have in the past. We had, up until about 3 years ago, a federal grant which covered the cost of all of our surveys. This year, graciously, the school district helped us out, but in order to be cost effective, we reduced the number and did a sampling of each grade because we felt it was important to continue to get a picture from every grade. But it's a financial issue and one that I hope that in the next 2 years that maybe we can go back to having more surveys, having the money available to really capture a larger sampling.
And just methodologically, I will just comment, it's wonderful when you can get the full population, terrific. Then we know for sure that this is representative of the whole population. But samples are used in research all the time. This particular sample matches up with the demographics of what the larger sample, what the population is. So we believe it to be representative, but there's always sampling error in any sample.
I was just wondering if your data is broken down by gender, and if so...
Yes, that information is available, but I don't have it in this particular presentation. I have just a few more slides. Let me run through here because we are running short on time. Here is one that was actually quite interesting and came about because we added a survey item asking kids about both alcohol and marijuana use and asked them, and this is a mirror of a question that they were asked earlier in the survey about themselves, on how many occasions, if any, do you think most students in your school drank one or more drinks of alcoholic beverage in the past 30 days? In the high school, 7.7% of the high school students said, yeah, I think, sorry, now I'm like, 7.7% believed that that other students responded zero, that they had not had anything to drink in the past 30 days. And when we actually look at the data for that frequency of use, 64.1% of the kids had not had any alcohol in the past 30 days. So very, very distinct disparity here. Same thing on marijuana, where only 18.9% of the high school students believe that their peers had had no marijuana use in the past 30 days, or had not used marijuana, whereas 82.3% of the kids said they had not used at all. So significant differences in an area, fruitful area for some prevention work. So what are the takeaways here? 2018 use rates are at their lowest level since surveying began. Youth are delaying alcohol and marijuana experimentation and use, which is a good thing. These are all strengths. The moral compass of the Larchmont and Mamaroneck kids remains strong. We have vastly improved sense of family rules about expected behavior, which has to do with some of those protective factors. We've significantly increased recognition of risk associated with use, and levels of perception about friends' disapproval of use have been rising consistently. But we've got some challenges, because despite considerable gains in protective factors coupled with substantial decreases in risk factors, despite progressive increases in perceived parental and peer disapproval of use, despite progressive decline in use, and having achieved our lowest use levels yet, alcohol and marijuana use rates continue to increase exponentially, 8th to 9th grade, 9th to 10th grade, 10th to 11th, peaking in 12th. Alcohol use rates in the 11th and 12th grade remain quite high, with 12th grade rates continuing to exceed national, state, and county. Binge drinking continues to position a substantial number of students as vulnerable to the unique risks associated with it, and our high school student perceptions about the frequency of alcohol and marijuana use do not match what they're telling us the frequency is. So, prevention works. We know that it works. There has been a significant improvement in this community in large measure because of the coordinated efforts organized by the coalition, but certainly contributions from many different sectors of the community. We need to celebrate these gains, but we also need to maintain our focus and our commitment, not take our foot off the gas or our eye off the ball, because we really will only be able to sustain this with continued effort. Thank you.
Before we move on, so what are some of the quick takeaways you're getting from this survey? In general, you're seeing some improvement. I just want to highlight, I think we know that these numbers are going to look different for marijuana. We already know that they are because of what's going on with legalizing marijuana and with vaping. So we know this is going to be an area of important concern for us to address. We already know it. We can, and we're going to have to take efforts to address this. There's a lot of takeaways from this that we're going to discuss at the end, but I want to move on to our next speaker. And I'm very proud to introduce Dr. Jess Shatkin, who leads the educational efforts of the NYU Child Studies Center, where he is Vice Chair for Education and Professor of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Pediatrics at the NYU School of Medicine. He's also directing one of the largest training programs in the country in child and adolescent psychiatry, and is founder and director of the nation's largest undergraduate child development program. He's written over 100 articles, he's written a number of books, and he appears on TV from Good Morning America to CBS Evening News and lots of other very distinguished places. I'd like to welcome Dr. Shatkin.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me. Thanks, Helene, for inviting me. Wherever Helene went to. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm going to, Helene asked me to talk to you for about 20, 25 minutes about why kids take risks and what things are going on in their brains, in their bodies, and in their world that support or encourage the risk-taking. And then to talk about strategies, predominantly, for how to address that risk-taking, alcohol and drugs being a major risk amongst the risks that kids take, and then leave at least 30 minutes open for Q&A. So my time's a little bit curtailed, but I will give you at least 20 plus minutes for questions and answers. So I want to talk with you about managing high risk. I have a couple of disclosures. So the material that I'm going to talk about tonight is all in this book on your left, Born to Be Wild, Why Teens Take Risks, and How We Can Help Keep Them Safe. And I'll walk you through just a tiny bit of that information from 10,000 feet today. But if you want to get knee-deep in why kids take risks, in why most of the programming that we've done hasn't made much of a difference to date, because we just understood why kids take risks, and then strategies that have a much greater likelihood of working, then I encourage you to take a look at the book. The book in the middle is a book for practitioners, people who work in child adolescent mental health. It's a textbook. And on Fridays on Dr. Radio, Sirius XM 110, I'm available from 8 to 10 a.m. East Coast time repeated throughout the week, and you can call in and ask questions related to child adolescent mental health. So I'll talk briefly about why kids engage in risky behavior, but you just had a nice data presentation about the fact that they do, and that doesn't surprise you, I'm sure. You get that they take risks, and beyond the fact that they're using alcohol and drugs, and I would be cautious, I don't mean to be a naysayer, but when you train in medicine, you're taught to be a naysayer. When you start gathering data in spring versus fall of senior year, when kids have senior springs, you have to be very suspect about that big drop. So I know that they accounted for that, but you have to be very careful about taking that too much at face value. Your community is doing better than national average in many ways, and that's fantastic. But there's a long way to go still, clearly, for drugs and alcohol. But there's many other risks our kids take. They text while they drive too fast, they drive drunk, they have unprotected sex, they have sex before we're ready for them to have sex. They jump off of the bridge into the river because their friends are doing it, because they were dared to do it. They climb electrical towers in Germany like I did when I was 16 to show off for girls. They do all sorts of things that they shouldn't be doing. And I want to talk a little bit about why that is. And then we'll talk about some practices that can help keep our kids safe, and then we'll do some discussion. So think for a minute about the risks that you took as a child, risks that your friends took, your siblings took, risks that your parents told you they took, or risks that your kids have already taken or might be taking. And I think those risks are a lot like the things I was just talking about, right? Not so surprising. You probably did many of these things yourself. Maybe you're even wondering, do I tell my kid that I did these things? What do I say when they ask me, did I smoke weed when I was in high school? We called it pot back then, but they called it weed. You know, how do we talk about this? So if you think about why people take risks, what changes between pre-pubertal life and post-pubertal life is dramatic. It's huge. It's brain and body, and they start thinking differently. That's the cognitive piece. They feel differently. That's the emotive piece. And it results in a change in behavior. Behaviors that they never would have thought before that were attractive or interesting, they start to think about engaging in. When my 8-year-old daughter found that in order to have a baby, a penis must go in a vagina, all bets were off. Like, that, never having kids, this is disgusting, why would you think of that? But at 13, that's a very attractive prospect, or curious at least, and at 16, it's a really interesting prospect. Things change immensely in our lives and in our bodies that make some of these risk-taking behaviors not only curious, but desirable. If you look at what hurts and kills our kids, it's always behavioral. So this is data from 2013, it's the same every year. The reason I show you data from 2013 in terms of the top factors that kill our youth is because that's the first year that suicide exceeded homicide in the number of deaths that an accident or behavior causes. So accidents, suicide, homicide in that order, before 2013, accidents, homicide, suicide. But these account, these three things, for 85% of the deaths in our youth, 15 to 24. And any one of them accounts for more than the 7 most leading causes thereafter. And they're all driven by changes in feeling or emotion, changes in thinking, because their brains have changed dramatically, and it all results in a change in behavior. And if you look worldwide, it's the same thing. There are some differences if you look at WHO, World Health Organization data, but you find the same thing. Road injury, suicide, interpersonal violence, through the top 5. They're because of infectious disease. There are, an HIV transmission via congenital effects from birth, mother to baby. That accounts for some of the high death rates in the developing world. And if you look at disability, depression, anxiety, pain, alcohol use, these are also psychiatric or behavioral causes. And so this is what kills our kids and disables our kids worldwide. It's nothing new. You knew it growing up. You know it now. You've had an hour of data telling you exactly what you already knew, that these things may be getting a little bit better in this community, but by and large, they haven't shown much change. And in fact, the change in cigarettes, which was great, has been more than compensated for an increase in vaping. And by the way, that vaping includes a lot of marijuana oils. So it's not like they're not smoking weed. All right, mental health, if you want to talk about that, the Surgeon General does a report every year, or about every year, and they focus on something that's facing our society. Often it's tuberculosis or HIV or hypertension. And in 1999, they did the first ever report on mental health, and they included a chapter on kids. And what they said was that by the age of 18, about 20% of our kids meet criteria for psychiatric diagnosis, which at the time, 20 years ago, was news breaking. I mean, that was like, wow. People like me working in the field had a good sense of that, but our communities didn't. But as we've done better studies, as we actually have done good, detailed epidemiologic studies, we found that actually it's more like half of our kids, by the time they reach 18, meet criteria for psychiatric disorder. About 30% meet criteria for an anxiety disorder alone in the high school years, 13 to 18. About 28% meet criteria for a severe disorder, and 5% of those are, 5% of the total, and those are those who meet criteria for substance abuse diagnosis or dependence diagnosis. We also know a rather shocking thing, and that is that if we don't intervene in childhood, we're going to be in trouble, because half of all major mental illness sets on by the age of 14 and 75% by the age of 24. And this is driven by the fact that adults who are chronically mentally ill with severe psychotic depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, substance abuse problems, they report having had major symptoms that were impairing their functioning at the very earliest of ages. So if we're not thinking about prevention, as you just heard, then we're making a mistake. There are some things that we know about prevention. If we have time, we can talk about what does work. But not everything works. And in fact, most of the efforts we've made to prevent and to moderate the mental illness we see or the substance abuse that we see have not only been poorly thought through, but they've caused more damage than good in most cases, whether it's DARE, zero tolerance policies, Scared Straight, whether it's how we do driver's ed or sex ed. Most of the time, we've been far from the mark, and we've not made things better, and in many cases made things worse. You may have heard of ACEs. Perhaps your family doctor has asked you whether you had any adverse childhood experiences, ACE. These are factors that affect kids at a young age and have long lasting health implications and mental health implications for them. So if you are exposed to violence in the home, if you have a sibling or a parent who goes to jail, if you have a contentious divorce, if there's a lot of fighting, if there's abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual, these things add up. And the more ACEs you have, the more likely you are to drop out of school, the more likely you are to be obese as an adult, the more likely you are to have hypertension or diabetes as an adult, the more likely you are to have a lower SAT score, a lower IQ score, and so forth. So we're looking at ACEs very carefully because we know that these things impact kids, and more than 50% of kids at least have one ACE in this country, and we know a lot of kids experiment with drugs. So let me ask you to start, why adolescents engage in risky behavior. So we'll spend just about 5 minutes talking about this. Normally when I give a talk on this topic, I spend about 20 minutes. I'll go through this relatively quickly. I've taken out a lot of pictures, but I just want to ask you about why it is that you imagine that young people take risks.
Because their brains crave it.
Okay, their brains crave it, okay? And I would say, you're right, and it's about dopamine. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yes? Say again? They're looking for attention. They're looking for attention. So I might change that a little bit and say that's kind of a peer effect, that they're driven actually by a need to show their peers what they can do. Maybe it's attention, but there's a neurobiological component to that as well, which is quite profound, and I'll talk about that. What else?
They have a worse mortality.
Okay, so they think they might be immortal or invincible, and that's a vital component of how we have thought about risk-taking for a long time. What else? Yes?
Maybe their brains don't really know it's risky.
Maybe they don't know it's risky because they don't have experience yet. You've been through a lot of stuff, so that's a major factor. In fact, in the book, I talk about 2 chapters about why people make decisions, how they make decisions. If you like this field, it's called behavioral economics, and it makes a lot of sense how kids see things differently from us. And a lot of reason is that they don't have the experience that we have. Yes, ma'am?
They are trying to find a new tribe, like they open a new tribe and they detach from the
Trying to find a new group, a new tribe.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so these are all great ideas, and I want to talk through them one by one. You're thinking about this clearly. This is fantastic. And there are a lot of reasons kids engage in risk, and we know a number of them. I want to start by dispelling just a myth or two. We have long thought that young people take risks because they believe that they're invincible or they can't be hurt. And what's fascinating is about 12 to 15 years ago, after thinking this for a long time, and many psychologists suggesting this theoretically, a famous guy named David Elkind talked about this, that you think they're invincible, and because they think they're invincible, think they can't be hurt, they think they're immortal, and so they take risks. But when we talked to adolescents, what we found was that they actually don't believe they're invincible. In fact, what they believe is that the risk of bad things happening is many, many times greater than it actually is. Go home to your 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old, 22, 24-year-old, and ask them tonight, what's the risk of getting pregnant from unprotected intercourse one time? They'll tell you 90%. They'll tell you 95%. They'll tell you 100% because they have bad luck. Ask them what the risk of HIV transmission is, from male to female or female to male. You don't know anything about the person's sexual history. Maybe they never had sex, maybe they're gay, maybe they use drugs, maybe they don't. You have no idea about their background. They could be a virgin. What's the risk of getting HIV? 95%. The risk if someone has HIV is under 1 in 1,000. Under 1 in 2,000 if you're going female to male. That's if they have HIV. Our kids misunderstand risk The reason being that they've been listening to us. We've been telling them things are dangerous. We've been telling them not to text and drive because they'll get into car accidents. We've been telling them that unprotected sex results in pregnancy, which it does about 5% of the time, and they actually believe us. And they believe the risk is very high. Ask a 15-year-old whether he'll die this year, and 20% of them will tell you they will. That's over 200 times the likelihood that they'll actually die. So they've been listening, and the important thing about the slide that was showed about what their perceived risk is, it doesn't really matter what their perceived risk is, because they always perceive the risk as very high. It has no impact on their behavior. So what we've been doing in most of our interventions is teaching them, don't you see bad things can happen? Don't you see that you face risk? Don't you know this is dangerous? And they're like, yeah, it's really dangerous. I get it. And they go ahead and do it anyway, because it has nothing to do with knowledge. They know more when we tell them this. They exaggerate it, but telling them this doesn't make a difference by and large. And we have lots and lots of data to show that. So there are different strategies we need. So they think the likelihood of earthquake is much, much greater than it is. They think the fact that you've asked how many kids, ask some kids if a tornado is going to hit tonight, what the likelihood of that is. They'll probably tell you 15, 20%. You ever seen a tornado here? Ask them the chance of an earthquake that's going to knock over the school tonight. No, 7%, 20%, 30%? Ever been an earthquake? No. Because they worry about bad things happening because we told them that bad things happen. Adults worry less, have a better sense, have more experience, they understand this kind of concept better. But adolescents do often have optimistic bias. They think they're going to beat the odds. They know they shouldn't drive drunk, but when they drive drunk, they do things other people don't think to do. They roll down the windows, they put on that CD where they know all the words to that song, they put both hands on the wheel, they sing along. In fact, even if it's cold outside, they open the window and turn on the airco. So you could argue that they're actually better drivers when they're drunk than when they're not. That's what they might tell you. And the fact is that young people are optimistic sometimes, and they do think they can beat the odds. That's called pluralistic ignorance. We think that we do things other people don't do, but the reality is that adults do it even more than young people. Adults are even more optimistically biased than young people. We've lived through more, we've gotten further, we've lost some hair, we've gotten gray, we've put on a few pounds. We know what life's lumps are like, and we think, okay, you know, I can get through this too. So we're actually more optimistic than young people are. So here's why they really take risks. Their brain maturation isn't complete. This is something you've heard a lot about in the last 15 years as we've developed really good scanning tools like functional MRI. We can see that the communication between the logical thinking part of the brain, which we call the frontal or prefrontal cortex, is not well networked with the emotional part of the brain, which we call the limbic system, and the specific structures are in what's called the ventral striatum, and the specific structures there are the nucleus accumbens, amygdala, and hippocampus. And in these structures, there is a lack of top-down control. As we get older, we get better at controlling our emotions. You know it. Young people's emotions are often out of control. And that's partly because, not exclusively, but partly because they don't have as much frontal control over their emotional brain. You can see it on scans, you can see it on tests, you can see it on challenges, and that's a fact. It's not the whole fact, the whole story. They're driven by reward, so they want reward. Dopamine is not a neurochemical of pleasure, which many of us think it is. What it really is a learning neurochemical. Dopamine teaches us to do things that are essential for our survival. Who would ever think to eat a mushroom? It's a fungus that grows in crap. Who would ever think to eat a cow? It's an adorable animal. Who would ever think to put a penis in a vagina? It's an insane thought. Until you bring dopamine into the picture and say, well, if you eat this, if you try this, if you do this, it will feel good. And that feel good tells us that it's important for survival. And dopamine is higher in the brain of adolescents than in anybody else throughout the entire life cycle. So sex is going to feel more exciting and maybe better. They may not be that good at it, but the thrill of it is out of control. The idea of driving fast is so much more fun. Why do we see adolescents at amusement parks? Because that thrill is so much more exciting for them than it is for us. Dopamine is at its highest levels ever, and it drives them towards risky behavior. This is why drugs of abuse set on around 13, 14, 15 and thereafter, because dopamine levels are so high, and drugs co-opt that mechanism of appeal. So methamphetamine, cocaine, marijuana increase dopamine levels 300,000, 900,000 times greater than a good conversation or getting an A on a test. That's a lot to compete with. That's a huge competition, and we are at a disadvantage. So they're driven by reward in a way they've never been before, and they're totally not ready for it, taken off guard. We have a lot of hormones running through our veins when we're young, and testosterone is one that builds muscles and, you know, makes us hairy. And oxytocin helps milk let down and helps to expel a baby from the uterus. But now we know that these hormones are very important socially as well. So that testosterone is not just about muscle and hair, it's about competition. And the more we compete with others when we're adolescents, the more likely we are to come out on top, and the more likely we are to get the mate of our choice. Same with oxytocin. Oxytocin is not about competition, but it's about social inclusion and exclusion. Oxytocin levels are adjusted neurologically by how much we are a part of the group or not a part of the group. And we keep those in that we like, and we push those out that we don't like. So cliques are in part driven by the fact that oxytocin levels are at peak highs during adolescence. Competition, like boys arm wrestling, fighting, trying to outdo each other. If one jumps in the river off the bridge, the other must do it, is driven by highest levels of testosterone they've ever experienced before. And they're driven to compete. Why are they driven to compete? So that they will be the alpha male. Why does it matter to be the alpha male? So they will get the alpha female. So there's a lot going on that we cannot control and that they are built to do. We know that when a 17-year-old, like my youngest son, drives upstate in Putnam County, where we have a weekend house, he drives beautifully. He drives two hands on the wheel, music's not too loud, I'm sitting there, or he's by himself, he does a great job. I've seen him drive just beautifully. And when you add a peer or two in the car, and he's behind the wheel, even if I'm there, he's driving twice as fast, he's banking those turns, all of a sudden Mario Andretti is behind the wheel, if you get my drift. We've done driving simulator studies, we've looked at people's brains, and we find that even if a young person believes another young person is watching them, they drive much more recklessly. They have 3 times as many accidents in the driving simulator. They run more yellow lights in the driving simulator. They take a lot more risks when they believe a peer is watching. Again, we think because they need to impress their peers in order to be that alpha male. This is evolutionarily driven. This is not something they're deciding or even thinking about doing. And when I say to my son, Julian, hey, you were driving so much more quickly when Ben and Henry were in the car than when it's just you and I, he says, I wasn't. He doesn't even notice it because he's driven to do it. And if you look at his brain during this task, if I were to do an fMRI of his brain, I'd see his reward centers, that emotional brain being very excited, very perfused with blood, and his frontal cortex kind of shutting down, taking a commercial break.
Are girls equally susceptible?
Girls are equally susceptible. And then there's behavioral contributions, all sorts of things that we do. What time does your high school start in the morning? 8. So now we know from lots and lots of studies that when you start later, 9, 10 for high school, I know how hard that is for a community, but when you do, automobile accidents go down about 20%. SAT scores go up about 10%. GPAs go up about 0.4. That's like the difference between, I don't know, Dartmouth and SUNY. There's a lot of change that happens when you give kids a later start. Why do they want to start late? Why do they want to sleep in? Well, we think that they have a delayed sleep cycle because they are the strongest. They are the most gutsy. They are the ones willing to take risks. They have better pain tolerance. They have better temperature tolerance. They have better immune systems. They can run faster, and they're more likely to take a risk. So don't you want them guarding the cave at night when a wild animal might come in instead of yourself doing it? Don't you want to send them off to Iraq and Afghanistan instead of us doing it? Makes sense to me. That's what we do. That's what we've done forever. And by the way, if they're not by themselves at the front of the cave or near the fire while we're sleeping, how are they ever going to couple off? So they need to couple off and have time alone. So they have a delayed sleep cycle, which we believe is entirely driven by evolution. And we fight it every single day by making them start school at 7:30, 8, 8:15. The Center for Disease Control has looked at the data and now says that we shouldn't start school before 8:30 in the morning, but only 20% of American high schools adhere to that recommendation. And again, the data could not be better. Grades, IQ scores, SAT scores, GPAs, driving accidents, bad decision making. When you don't sleep well, you don't make good decisions. Also, drugs happen during this time, right? People start drinking coffee, people start taking drugs. This is the behavioral contributions that we fight. All of this adds up to an enormous evolutionary advantage for our species. It's not good for the individual, but it's great for the species. Mother Nature, in typical style, will sacrifice thousands to save millions. And that's what the adolescent brain is all about. They are built for taking risks. They are not an accident. They are a perfect risk-taking machine. And they've been built for it. So I think we have to start there and thinking about what strategies we're going to use, because if we don't accept that they are built for risk, We're going to keep trying to do things from our perspective, which is very different from theirs. And by the way, they often agree with us 110%. Oh yeah, I shouldn't drive fast. Oh yeah, I shouldn't text and drive. Oh yeah, I shouldn't drink and drive. I know that. Have a logical conversation with your kid. Of course they agree with you. Who would disagree with that? But they are adolescents, and so there's a lack of control that they have over biology. Substance use always starts in the mid-late teen years, and whatever curve you like to look at, this is where it begins. And the greatest cause of preventable death in our world is tobacco. Kills 500,000 people in America, and pretty much more than that throughout the world. The second greatest cause of preventable death has to do with alcohol, and the third with obesity. 1 million people die every year in the United States from these three causes. These are all addictive behaviors that start in adolescence. And we're doing a disservice to our kids if we're not getting some hold of that. So this is the adolescent paradox. They're stronger, faster, they're in better shape than they'll ever be, they have more muscle, they're great immune response, but they die at much higher rates than they have before, and they will after. And they die because they take risks. And that's what the book is about. Until we get to this, what practices will keep our kids safe from risk? So let's talk a little bit about what we know about things that are going to help us protect our kids from risk. Let me just quickly look at the time. 8:27, give me about 10 minutes, and then we'll do discussion. So the first thing is that giving your kids more information is okay, but it's not going to make a difference. They already believe the risks are much greater than they are. Telling them the X% of people get pregnant or X% of people get into car accidents, sure. Go ahead, it makes you feel good, it's not going to change their behavior. They already believe that the risks are much greater than they actually are. So we have to move on and look at the things that will impact them. We want to focus on practice, role-playing is a good one, coming up with ways and strategies to manage some of this risk, and emotional salience. And by that, I mean that they're much more driven by their emotions than we are as adults. And so we need to appeal to their emotions and give you some ideas about how to do that. And we have to recognize that they're not fully mature. So even though at 15 or 16, an adolescent can make outstanding selections and decisions when they have the same information you have. Sit down with your retirement, ask them which fund to invest in, sit down with your savings account, ask them which house to buy, ask them which car to buy based on all the available information, and as long as they're not around a peer, and as long as they're not underslept, and they're not drunk or high, they'll make outstanding decisions by the time they're 15 or 16. They'll make decisions as good as yours if they have the same information. But ask them to make that decision when they're tired, or when they're caffeinated, or when they're drunk or high, or when they are, around peers, and they'll make terrible decisions often. So we have to supervise still. It's very tempting not to. So we need to focus on automatic decision making. We need to give them plans in advance, because if we leave it to them at that minute to make a decision about what to do, that decision is influenced by the peers around them, by the neurobiology they have, by the dopamine, by the oxytocin, by the testosterone, and they often make erroneous decisions, or decisions that are in contrast to their health. It's working against what we want. So we want to help them make decisions in advance. We want to shelter young kids as much as we can. We want to modify the environment, like school start times is one example. And we want to provide apprenticeships and opportunities for people to learn from people who know what they're doing in supervised areas. I'm not saying get rid of all risk. I think skateboarding is great. I think jumping out of a plane is fine. But don't do it out of the blue. Do it with the proper orientation. All right, what can we do specifically? So in 1966, a woman named Diana Baumrind at UC Berkeley said that, I've been watching the kids in this daycare center, and I believe that there are different types of parenting approaches, and I can codify them and I can score them. And I identify 4 types. Authoritarian, which is why? Because I said so. Permissive, which is do whatever you want, kids, like indulgent parenting. Neglectful, which is I don't even know what they're doing parenting. And authoritative, which is loving and organized and structured with firm limits and support. And she found that authoritative, or what's called just right parenting, resulted in kids who not only had fewer health risks and behavioral risks, but they had better grades, they had less obesity, they had less hypertension, diabetes, they had AIDS, they had better careers, they got through college, they didn't drop out of high school, they didn't get pregnant early. Kids whose parents use this style of parenting, which about 65% of parents do, that's the good news, turn out, by and large, much healthier, much safer, much happier with the years. We can teach that. We can teach that very effectively to kids through what's called behavioral parent training or behavioral parent management training. And these are things that many of you do, perhaps without even knowing you're doing it. but maybe some of you don't do it or haven't done it. It works outstanding until the kids hit double digits. It's unbelievable until they hit 10, 11, 12. Around 11, 12, they start to get big enough to tell you to screw off and not take their time out or do what you tell them to do. But before then, they really can be managed very, very well with parent training. This is the use of positive reinforcement, at least 4 or 5 to 1, over negative reinforcement. It's the use of effective commands, which are not questions like, hey buddy, think it's time to brush your teeth now? That's not the way you get someone to brush their teeth. It's selective ignoring, so safely ignoring what we can ignore, not running out in the street, but Mom, I'm at grandma's house, for 20 times in a row. It's setting up structure in the house and structure with their day. It's giving rewards, using rewards to encourage what they want. And at the end of all that, maybe 20% of the time, 10% of the time, when there's a problem, using a limit, exhibiting a consequence, like taking something away or giving a timeout. When we do that, we don't fix the whole world, but we make everybody better. And for oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, the kind of disorders that I often treat in kids, this is what we teach parents first. There's no medication for oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder. God knows we medicate these kids a lot, and sometimes we have to. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to teach the parents to parent more effectively, more behaviorally. And that works really, really well. When they get older, if it's been started when they're young, you're in for more smooth sailing. If you don't start it till they're 15, you'll still get some gains, but it's not nearly as valuable. Close monitoring makes a big difference. Parents who know what their kids are doing, parents who are observing their kids' lives, parents who know their kids' friends and who know their kids' friends' parents, parents who engage with their kids' friends' parents and go to the soccer games and have them over for dinner and hang out and share information, these kids do much, much better. These kids feel better. They feel that they are supervised. Our kids like limits. They don't always say they like limits, they don't always know they like limits, but they like to know sort of where the boundaries, they want to know you're there. And study after study shows that close monitoring has a big impact. As does talking to your kids about sex, drugs, rock and roll, anything else that you want to talk with them regarding risky behavior. This doesn't mean you have to tell them about your life, but this does mean having a conversation with them, and not one conversation. It's an ongoing conversation. And it's a conversation that starts as soon as they can talk about the world, about how the world works, about what they smell on the street. What's that smell, Daddy? That's marijuana. That's your first conversation. Or what's happening in that TV show that I'm watching that I shouldn't be watching? Well, those guys are using heroin. That's what this is. And these conversations, when we provide them to our kids, when we engage with our kids, they actually ask us questions, they come to us more often, and they learn from us as opposed to learning only from the internet or from their friends. Much of that information, as we know, is wrong. So it's important to talk to them about sex, drugs, and condoms. And I don't want to cause a problem for your community, but if you don't have condoms in your school readily accessible for teenagers, you're making a mistake. I don't know what you do, but if you don't do it, it's an error. Because every study from New Zealand to Australia to Canada to the United States to Western Europe has shown that when we make condoms available on the door of the health educator's office, in the principal's office, in the hallways, when they are available, kids don't have more sex. They do not have more sex. It doesn't start them having sex. It doesn't make them have sex. They laugh about the condoms. It becomes commonplace. They stop noticing them. But the kids who are having sex are more likely to use a condom. So please, 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 if you want to stop pregnancy, which 51% of Latina teens are pregnant by the time they reach 19, 51% of Latina teens in America are pregnant by the time they end teenagehood. 30% of girls are pregnant nationally by the time they hit 20. Same number have a sexually transmitted infection by the time they're 18. Condoms are a surefire way to prevent some of that. Focus our interventions on kids who are at high risk. So the reality is that DARE has been a mess. I mean, there's a better DARE version now, and maybe you're using DARE, and there's some better approaches to DARE now, but historically DARE, at least until about 10 years ago, 5 years ago, really most DAREs weren't very good. And in fact, many DAREs showed that the kids who went through DARE did more drugs than those kids who didn't. And we can talk about why after if you like, but the point is, getting them to practice refusal strategies, getting them to actually talk to each other, getting them to communicate about drugs is a better approach, but still not a guarantee they won't use it. But a much better approach that seems to work is targeting those kids at high risk. Because the interventions that are universal, that teach everybody about drugs, just teach people about drugs. They don't stop doing drugs. But interventions that identify who the high-risk kids are, because they've used drugs before, because they hang out at the spot on campus where kids smoke weed, because their parents had a drug problem, and you know about it, you can intervene. Those kids, we have a much greater chance of seeing improvement and a decrease in drug use. And when they stop using drugs, the kids around them stop using drugs more as well. That's called the herd effect. When you take the cool kids out of the equation, other kids follow. So you want to identify the kids who are at risk, not to punish or kick them out, but to give them the support they need, to get them through school, to give them the educational tutoring support they need, and to give them the counseling that they need, and they and others will do better. Limiting screen time, we could talk for hours about that, but we know these days, we know how potentially toxic screen time is on lots of levels, whether it's the light effect and the blocking of melatonin, which we can get into if we want to, whether it's the fact that they're distracted, whether it's the fact that it makes their reward centers more sensitive and their threat detection centers more in tune, so it makes them more agitated and it makes them less turned on by natural reinforcers like a good conversation. There's a lot of reasons to limit our kids' screen time, and we can talk about strategies for that, but that's a key component here. Rewarding our kids for what they want, identifying the rewards that they want, and then going after those. What does your teenager want? They want to drive, they want to have a boyfriend, girlfriend. So you use those things as carrots to get what you want, which I know you're doing. Provide safe risks, the skateboarding, the jumping out of a plane, whatever the equivalents are for you, going to amusement parks, but things that you're comfortable with in ways that you're comfortable. And highlight the short-term benefits of not taking risks. If you don't take the risk, you don't have to lie to your parents. Most kids still don't want to lie to their parents. There's a lot we're not doing around teaching our kids about media. So I want to spend a minute talking about media. One of the things that adolescents are often, almost all adolescents, are very consumed with is not being told what to do. We know psychologically where this comes from. Partly it's from needing to be independent so they can find their own mate and evolve in the way that I've been describing. And part of it's because they know they don't know everything about the world. They feel insecure about it, and so they have what we call a manic or narcissistic defense where they fight back and say, no, I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm doing. This started with my son Julian at 2, and he said, I do whatever I want. I do whatever I want. That's what young people are doing. They're just having a different kind of a tantrum when they're 15 or 17 or 22 than when they're 2. But it's the same effect. So one of the things they want to fight back against is the man. You're the man often, the teacher's the man often, the school's the man, the police are the man, all sorts of people are the man. But what they fail to see often is that a lot of these cool behaviors, quote unquote, that they're engaged in, these risk-taking behaviors, are actually driven by the man. The man is the corporation that is getting them to smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol or smoke weed. Weed is now a corporation, right? It's been for a while, but now it's actually legally acceptably a corporation. I was in Denver recently, went into a dispensary. It's absolutely run by corporations. So get them to realize that the media is manipulating them, and that's something for them to fight back against. We call that media literacy, and all you gotta do is show them some images like this. George Clooney's Casamigos, isn't that a lovely tequila? It's great. He's having tequila. George Clooney's a wonderful actor. I used to watch him in ER when I was in medical school, so fun. That's great. But in this ad, this seemingly innocuous ad, he's drinking alcohol, he's riding a motorcycle without a helmet, which, by the way, 35% of young people do when they ride motorcycles. They ride them without a helmet. 80% ride a bicycle without a helmet. If there's anything we know that's a public health intervention, it's wearing a helmet when you're on a cycle. And he's there with his workers and everything's lovely, but he's drinking and driving, or at least that's the implication. And isn't that cool? So when you show this to your kid, they're like, that's a cool ad. Those bikes look awesome. They're having a great time. The wind's blowing back their hair. But in fact, we need to emphasize to our kids that this is fools, not cools. Here's another ad, lovely ad. Ad of a bunch of black people in a roller coaster having a great time. And they're just having a lovely day at the amusement park. They're having fun, everybody likes to do that. Oh, in the corner there's Newport cigarettes. This ad wouldn't be so offensive if it weren't for the fact that black neighborhoods have 10 times or more advertisements for tobacco than other neighborhoods. Why? Because they sell. Why? Because people in poverty, not because they're black, but because people who are impoverished, and more black communities are impoverished than white communities, or Latino communities and so forth, are more likely to turn to a salve or something like tobacco to deal with the frustration, anger, bad feeling they have. The same is true with alcohol ads, and the same is true with the mentally ill. We target the mentally ill with our cigarette ads. So this is an issue of social justice, and young people are consumed by social justice, and I think that we need to teach them about how these ads are manipulating them to think that cigarette smoking is cool, when in fact, if you care about equality, if you care about racism, if you care about people's rights, then you absolutely want to screw those tobacco companies. And that's a good energy or effort for our young people who want justice. How about this ad? Show this to a teenager and they'll say, oh, that's like, I don't know, it's a bottle of vodka, I guess, and there's some cherries, some women there, kind of. But then say, well, what else could that be? Do you see the erect penis and testicles? Oh my God, they say. So what's the implication? If you drink Sky vodka, women are going to want to do this with you? This is the hope? Or that? If you buy Tom Ford cologne, women are just going to be dying to put that bottle in their parts? And to be all excited about it and have an orgasm because you bought that cologne? Really? Is that how it works? Smart may have the brains, but stupid has the balls. So don't even try to be smart. Don't even try to be creative and engaged. Just, you know, show off. That's exactly what you should be doing at this age. Get yourself in trouble. Coca-Cola? How about this? The BK Super 7-incher. It'll blow your mind away. So it's a lot of fun to go through these ads. You're an inhibited crowd. Usually people laugh a lot. But these ads are pretty fun, and the kids enjoy it and see a lot and learn a lot from it. What else can we do? We can acknowledge that in many cases the consequence, the risk is low. So driving while drunk, while a terrible idea, doesn't usually result in an accident, doesn't usually result in someone dying or getting maimed, but it's one of those things that you cannot come back from. There are certain things you don't return from the same person. Getting pregnant, no matter what you do about the pregnancy, you're a different person after that. A car accident, hurting someone, hurting yourself, trying to kill yourself, killing yourself. By the way, 9% of our teenagers in the US have made a suicide attempt, 13 to 18. 17% report that they think about suicide regularly. 30% say that they often feel hopeless and depressed for at least 2 weeks prior to the survey, which is our clinical time length for depression. So recognize, if you like, that the consequence is dire. And the frequency isn't that high, but if it happens, it's something you may not come back from. And as if you want something to say to your kids as they go out the door, it's not don't overdo it. It's not take it easy tonight, don't go too far. Because that message is like, well, then they can decide in the moment. They might weigh the pros and cons and remember when the peers are around, when the hormones are high, when the dopamine is flowing, they're likely to make a bad decision. The message instead is use good judgment, or once is all it takes. That could be a nice mantra. Once is all it takes to get to one of those places from which you can't come back. Use analogies if you need help with that. Like, would you play Russian roulette for $1 million? Is it worth a 1 in 6 or 15% chance that you'll die? $1 million. What dollar value is worth a 1 in 6 chance that you'll die? These are the kind of conversations that you can have with your kids to try to get them to understand the go, no-go approach to risk-taking as opposed to determining in the moment whether they should engage in risk. So emotional and personal cues are very helpful. So ask your kids what will happen if they get pregnant. What happens next? What happens next? What happens next? They don't want to have these conversations, but if you have these conversations, they'll walk you through it, and eventually they'll come up against a wall, and they'll have to talk with you about what is next and what to do about it. And that's a conversation they don't want to have, but has an impact on their behavior. Identify the red alerts in your family. What's a red alert? Here's one: home alone after school with your boyfriend. If you're not having sex or not prepared to have sex. And if our kids are going to school at 8 in the morning, by the way, they're out at 2, where are you at 2 o'clock? Are you at the mall hanging out with them? Are you at home hanging out with them? In fact, the schools that have done much better work in protecting our kids from risk are those who give them mandatory, engaging after-school programming so that the kids are in programming while we're in programming at work. And they have a place to go to not just get tutoring, which is great, or not just play sports, but do music, dance, art, theater, all the things that schools have stopped funding for a variety of reasons. But these are the things that make a difference in kids' lives. And when you do this, they smoke fewer cigarettes, like a lot fewer. Iceland developed a great program. And they had the highest rate of cigarette smoking in Europe, and they went to the very lowest when they built in automatic, mandatory after-school programming. And practice refusal skills, and role model for your kids. If you don't want them to drink, I suggest you don't drink for a while, or you don't have more than 1 drink. It's okay for you to drink, the law says you can, but don't get drunk in front of your kids. They'll think it's okay. They follow what you do. Use frequent reminders, because they can be reminded. Plan decision pathways for moments of risk in advance of the risk itself. So in a moment of what we call cold cognition, when they're logically thinking, when they're able to have a conversation with you, like when I talk with my son about driving, as opposed to when he's actually driving. That's not a good time to make a decision about how fast to go. So if we have a deal that he can never go past 30 miles an hour on the causeway, then that's what it is. He knows what it is. It's not like about 30 miles an hour. It's very specific, it's very precise. You never go past 30 on the causeway, done. Teach emotional self-regulation. This is something our schools are increasingly doing and something we can do more of, but we know a lot of things that we can do to teach kids to calm themselves down. In San Francisco, the 5 most troubled schools in the Mission District added 30 minutes a day of breathing, 15 minutes first thing in the morning, 15 minutes end of the day, and fights went away. Expulsions from school went away. Suspensions went away. The numbers dropped unbelievably. Grades went up, half a GPA point, because these kids were cooling down first thing in the morning and cooling down in the day. No special curriculum, no razzle-dazzle, just turn the lights low. If you don't want to breathe in this way, you don't have to, but here's what we do. We belly breathe, and here's how we do it. Huge impact. Social norms marketing, which is part of what was being talked about earlier. When you ask kids, how many people do you think have smoked cigarettes, or how many people have done this or that in the last month, they always way overestimate. Way overestimate, just like the risks. They way overestimate, 90% of people used a hookah last month. 3% of their friends used a hookah last month, but they think 90% did. So giving them those numbers can sometimes have an impact. Not all studies, but sometimes. And when we talk about these numbers with our kids, use ratios, not percent. We're all terrible with percent. I mean, it's remarkable how many people can't figure out the tip without their iPhone. But if you tell them it's 1 in 5, break that into 5 pieces, give 1 of the 5 pieces to the waiter, they'll do much better. So what you want to do is use the same kind of numbers when you're talking with kids. There's more we can do. We've moved away from exercise and nutrition and start times in schools, but that's something that's a triumvirate of good health, and we know a lot about that. I do a lot of work in resilience. I run programs at the college at NYU. We have an expansive resilience program. We're studying a lot of factors, and so far our results are outstanding. I can go through that if you want to and tell you what we're focusing on. Start time is a big factor, and I think that we haven't brought neuroscience into high school or middle school or elementary school. Nobody gets a course on sleep, but we know so much about sleep now. We know so much about sleep, and when you know about sleep, you can actually do much better in your day-to-day functioning, and you can manage your sleep much better. And when young people learn about sleep, it's been shown, they sleep better. We can do that. Why not have neuroscience classes in school? Why not teach them about the brain? Why not teach them what they're up against? And then in society, of course, poverty, mentorship programs, some are effective, policies, research dollars, driving alcohol, drug laws. These are the kinds of things that none of us is going to take on individually, but as a community we can. So that's the short version of what I wanted to share with you. I'm happy to engage with you. I'd love to hear what you have to say and answer any questions I can, and thank you for your attention.
Excellent presentation. Thank you, Dr. Shatkin. Any questions?
Screen time. So what would you like to talk about?
You had thoughts on how to approach children?
Yeah. So in my book, I give a sort of a contract, essentially, what the things are that I think you should do, but I'll summarize them here for you. First of all, it starts at the very earliest of age, and I would hold your kids from the screens when they're young, as long as possible, because nobody needs screen time. Parents use screen time as a babysitter, parents use screen time to give themselves a break, totally reasonable, but it's not the best place to give them a break. And the American Academy of Pediatrics has recommended since 1999 that we don't expose kids before 2 and give them very little time and none that's unsupervised on screens before 6 years of age. Most families aren't doing that, okay. Increasingly we have data showing that that's actually helpful for them to stay away from screens, that they learn to depend on it, they learn to self-regulate by using the screen. I can't tell you how many college-age patients I have who have no other coping skills than to watch Netflix. They don't know how to calm themselves down otherwise. They don't know how to go take a run. They don't know how to work things out in their mind or call a friend. They really, really struggle. So things that we can do, and I think the most likely challenge that you're faced with in this group is the cell phone. So you own the phone. When you give your child a phone, which by the way, no high school student needs, they just don't need it. I'm not saying you shouldn't give it to them, but we know they don't need it. The world is safer now, with the exception of school shootings, which have increased. But kidnappings, molestations, much fewer than they were in the 70s when we were kids. We didn't have phones. The phones aren't protecting them now. If someone's shooting, what are they going to call 911? Someone's got a phone. Someone will call 911. The phone isn't the answer there. So they don't need to have the phone. So remember that. A. B, the phone is yours. You pay for the phone. They don't have the means to pay for the bill. They don't own the phone. They don't have a job that can pay for the phone. In fact, if you're not 18, you can't even get a phone contract. So you own the phone. They can call it their phone, and it's your phone. Install something like Life 360, or make sure that on your phone, your kid's phone, there's an app that can trace them so that you know where they are, and that they don't turn it off. Or if they turn it off, or disallow it, then the phone gets taken away. There's a give and take. You don't trust me, Dad. I trust you. I trust you within a certain range. And that range grows every year, every month, every day. And sometimes you need to be reminded and pulled back in, and then I'll let you out again. And that's what this contract is about. So it's about managing their screen time. It's about using it as a reward because they want that phone, okay? But it's your phone. You're going to pay for it. You're going to control it. You can get online. You can shut it down anytime. You can stop the internet. And there aren't that many things that we have control over in teenagehood that our kids like. So this might be a blessing. This is something that holds them very close to you, like the car. But a lot of other things that you used to control, like, foods they might eat or, clothes they might wear, you have less control over. Still some, but less. So I would encourage you to use that as a reward and to think of it that way.
So, excellent advice. A number of you are sitting here thinking, yeah, but it's hard for me to do it with my teenager. So, what can you do here in the community? When you are having questions or struggles, there's a place called the Community Counseling Center, and we have a parent center where we run tons of parent support groups to teach these exact skills, and for you to have support amongst other parents about how do you create different community norms, which is one of the things you were talking about. So just access Community Counseling Center. Katie Sawyer, just raise your hand. She's very active at the Parent Center, and we provide lots of parent support groups to teach skills on just how to navigate some of these things with kids. We also do a lot of things in the school, some of the programs that you were talking about. This school system has been way ahead of the curve in implementing social emotional learning programs and teaching emotional resiliency skills. The Life Skills program in Homics, which reaches all 6th and 7th graders, is one of those gold standard programs by Bachman. And we've been ahead of the curve for like 15 years doing it. I think it's just one of many things, including what a lot of the school personnel are doing, some of them are here, that have led to that 10-year reduction in substance abuse. So there's lots of support out there for parents to address how to implement these wonderful recommendations. Other questions?
Can I ask a question? How do you deal with, as they're becoming adolescents, how do you deal with their defiance?
So defiance, the question is, as they become adolescents, how do you deal with defiance? So you parents are dealing with defiance from day one. I don't want to sleep, I don't want to eat, in infancy. 12 hours in it, you're dealing with defiance. You're exhausted and they want something you want to give. Or you want to give something they don't want. So this is something that we've been starting from the very earliest of ages, and I would start by saying we should all be well-versed in the parent management training skills. Again, positive reinforcement works much better than any other kind of reinforcement. Effective commands, so telling kids exactly what you want from them, and your coworkers and your boss and your underlings as well, because what that does is it makes the evaluation criteria very, very clear. So you say, this is what I want, this is how it is. We turn off the TV now. We turn off the TV in 5 minutes and you stick to it. This is the end after this show. Time to brush your teeth and go to bed. That's the way we talk to our kids at a young age, and that not exclusively, not only, of course, we do all the fun stuff and enjoy them a great deal, but when it comes to getting the work done, we teach them to be responsible adults by teaching them how to do the things that need to get done. So that's the first thing. They become more defined as they age, and it's important for us, to put on our oxygen mask first, to have our own strategies for coping, so that we don't get carried away and find ourselves yelling and screaming, because again, that entitles them to some degree, at least in name, to yell and scream back. So that's a big part of it. And then working through these kinds of strategies, the book, but many books are filled with these kinds of things. And counselors like this center and any psychiatrist or psychologist can work with you on your specific child and what the specific strategies should be. But it starts with us as parents taking ownership of the home. Us knowing that we are the alpha. And that's not a mean thing. It's not like we don't value them. It's not that they aren't equal humans. It's that we are schooling them to be civilized adults. And if we fail at that, then we'll pay for that and they will the rest of their lives. Our job is to teach them to be responsible adults, and there are key strategies we can use to do that. So helping them to regulate, teaching them to calmly breathe, teaching them to, going through coping skills. There's great coping skills, like taking a run, doing 20 push-ups when you're upset, like writing down your feelings in a journal, like calling a friend, like taking a walk with your dog. There's a million good, talking to your counselor or your parent, there's a million good coping skills, and we want to teach those early on and encourage the negative coping skills like smoking weed or drinking alcohol or watching Netflix all the time, which is sort of in between. It's not terrible, but it's not going to get you anywhere. And help our kids understand there's active and there's passive coping skills, there's good and there's less good coping skills, and teach them those. Again, schools can help, you can help. There's not a simple answer, but I'm trying to give you a global perspective on the kind of things that we think about. And when I'm working with kids who are facing real clinical problems in this area, that's what I'm doing. I'm re-educating them, I'm giving them resilience skills, I'm giving them coping skills, I'm letting them talk and express their feelings, I'm trying to help them to identify where else they can go and how else they can manage. And teaching them the logic of, you don't want to yell, because if you yell, you don't get what you want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's fine, but in a moment of high emotion, that part of the brain is going to take a break, and they're going to be all on emotion. So helping them learn those things is part of the story, but talking to them isn't enough.
How big a deal is lying, and is it important if you know a teenager is lying that they get called out on it, and how do you distinguish?
So the question is, how big of a deal is lying, and if you know they're lying, you call them out on it. And I can't give you a perfect answer because it partly depends on the lie, and it depends on why they're doing it, and who else is there, and what the setting is, and so forth. So I think that young people lie sometimes when they get in a position that they're embarrassed about or don't know how to get themselves out of. So you can sometimes help them out of it kindly by talking about the possibilities. You know, oh, it could be this, it could be that, without having to get them to necessarily own it. Well, it could be that, you know, you called on the cell phone. It also could be that maybe you just forgot, you know, and you just didn't, you know, remember to call me, and that's why I picked you up late because I didn't hear from you till then, or you know, whatever it is. I think that when it comes to drugs and alcohol, or you start to see sliding into behavior that's really potentially dangerous for them, then I think you have to call them out on it if you know the truth. But what you don't want to do is get in the he said, she said. Because like most arguments, there's not a camera in the corner recording the conversation. So most of our arguments focus on what happened, who said what. But that devolves quickly into blaming and pointing fingers, and it doesn't get us very far. The most important thing to try to do is to help our kids express their feelings about whatever happened. So what are you feeling? Usually they're feeling shame, embarrassment, guilt, and that's why they lie. They don't want to feel those things are distasteful, so you can start to talk about how you feel at that moment, or how you deal with those kinds of things. And the reason they don't want to talk about their feelings is because if they feel these things, then that may mean that they're a bad person, they're an awful person, they're worth nothing, and you can walk all over them, and you can just, you know, completely control them, and they're worth absolutely nothing. And no one wants to face those feelings that we all have on some level about ourselves. So it starts with identifying why they're doing this, and then addressing feelings. If you want to read a good book on that, read Difficult Conversations by Stone and Patton. Fantastic book. Over 1 million copies sold. Best self-help book I've ever read. I did a year-long, part of my training as a psychiatrist was in couples therapy, and did a year-long program, and that book summarized in 200 pages everything I learned in a year.
Crucial conversations.
Difficult Conversations. Sorry. No, Difficult Conversations. Different book. Stone and Patton.
Yes, up here.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are, knowing that kids are kind of pre-programmed to undertake risky behaviors and probably will try alcohol or other substances at some point in high school. If you find out that they did, should they be punished? Should you ground them? Should you try and understand that they are pre-programmed to do this?
Yeah.
And that you yourself did this?
Sure. Sure. So great question. Because they're sort of programmed to take risk, they're built that way, and we think that the species is not going to change anytime in our lifetime, right? That's evolution. Because they're built this way, then what do we do when they take these risks? Do we just accept it, or do we punish? I think there's more than just accept or punish. I think there's conversations that happen before they engage in risk where you lay out the rules of the family. Here's what I expect from you. And it's very difficult, because if you say, I don't want you to ever drink before you're 18 or 21 or whatever, I want you to ever smoke weed, I never want to hear about that stuff, then you'll never hear about it. But they'll do it. At least half of them will smoke weed by the time they graduate high school. At least 58% in the country will have sex by the time they're a senior. 50% by the time they're a junior. So they're doing these things, and if we say absolutely no go, that those are the kids who often are sneaky about it and get themselves in more trouble because they can't talk to you about it. Yet, we can't really rely on them to use very good judgment about this most of the time, because they get around peers and their hormone levels get out of whack and their dopamine goes crazy, and they make crazy decisions. So it's about knowing your child. It's about negotiating with your spouse or the other parent about how you're going to manage these things, what feels right to you. You're going to lay down some rules, and you're going to try to keep communication lines open. You're going to try to know where they're spending their time, with whom they're spending their time. You're going to try to help them in school so that they find school rewarding so they don't want to go to drugs, and they find after-school activities rewarding so they don't want to go to drugs. And if they're not getting the support they need in school, then you get them a tutor, you go to the school. I mean, that's the kind of active parenting that we have to do, and it's really hard because half of our families end in divorce, and more than half of second marriages end in divorce. And the kids are being raised by single parents who have to work 2 jobs, and the schools can't do everything. And so this is where a lot of this comes from. We know that.
And so instead of just saying, no, you're not going to do this, give them education about what the science is telling us about early use of drugs and alcohol. And just give them the science and educate them about first use, what does delaying give your brain a chance to develop, so that they really know that stuff.
And I think that's valuable. That's a place where education is really useful, because we haven't really brought that level of neuroscience to school. Maybe you guys have, and that's outstanding, but most schools haven't. So about drugs, about sleep, about alcohol, what it does to you, how it affects your body, what steroids do to you. There's a lot that young people don't know. And when they know, it has some impact. And then it also means very active engagement from the adults in their life. And I wish I could give you a simple answer, but you know, if I did, I'd be speaking in Sweden at the Nobel Prize Committee, not here.
One last question. Yes?
With regards to that last point, all of our sophomores in high school have to take mandatory health course. Are you saying that the information that you have down here in terms of neuroscience is not correctly presented in the New York State curriculum?
Yes, absolutely. The kind of stuff I'm talking about isn't in the New York State curriculum for health education. Most health education curricula are dated. They update, of course, but most of it still veers towards, you know, how the body looks, what a uterus looks like, how an orgasm occurs, you know, all these kinds of things. There is education that's useful for them. It's not that they may know that stuff or not, but most of the health education programs that have been studied have not been shown to ameliorate any risk at all. In fact, I can't think of one general health education program that has done anything for risk. That doesn't mean that we should stop trying. There's actually a lot more practical stuff that I think those classes could offer.
And fortunately, this school district does more than just what's required, and that's some of the additional programs that they offer. Guys, we have to wrap it up. Yes. Yes.
Who is with us, and credit, like everything that you were showing, I kept turning around because it's a lot of what is happening here with our high school and our social work. I mean, there's obviously a lot of work to do, but I would not put us in the category of just looking at the bottom.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
We're impressed about that.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that, and I'm not surprised. You know, in a major metropolitan area, you're going to have more progressivism. You know, every high school in New York City, in the city at least, has to have condoms, for example. I beat that drum pretty loudly. I don't know if you guys do, but they have to in the city. So in these epicenters, you're going to have more education, more activism, and that's outstanding. We need to figure out exactly what the right formula is, but you're trying, and that's exactly what we should be doing.
Guys, thank you all for coming. Please